Marty Demko. Every so often I read something that I just feel I have to share with you. This was in yesterday's Wall Street Journal, written by Heather MacDonald. It's called Chicago Crime and Democratic Values. The Democratic National Committee presented its 2024 convention site as a show of confidence, quote, Chicago is a world-class city that looks like America and demonstrates the values of the Democratic Party, end quote, Brandon Johnson, then mayor-elect, said in the DNC's April 2023 announcement. Fast forward to this July 4th. Over the 4-day holiday weekend in Chicago, 19 people were fatally shot and more than 100 wounded by gunfire. One of them, 8-year-old Bryson Orr, was killed along with 2 women in a drive-by shooting. This wasn't unusual. On Memorial Day weekend, 10 people lost their lives to gun violence, including 5-year-old Rain Ware. On Father's Day weekend, more than 70 people were shot and 8 killed. The child victims this summer include 7-year-old Jai Mani Amir Rivera, fatally shot in the chest while walking to a neighbor's house on June 18th. A 3-month-old boy named Jemimiah, his parents, fearing for their safety, have kept the family name out of the news, was shot in the chest on July 27th while riding in a car and remains in critical condition. On Thursday, a 3-year-old boy was grazed by a bullet fired by an adversary of his father. Juveniles are well represented among perpetrators as well as victims. 16-year-old Rayseon Comer has been charged in Jamai Mani's murder. On July 8th, an 11-year-old girl and 3 other minors allegedly assaulted and robbed a 63-year-old man on a subway train. Teenagers populate the gangs that use stolen cars and weapons to commit back-to-back carjackings. Is this what happens when you govern in accord with, quote, the values of the Democratic Party, end quote? Convention speakers will likely argue that crime has gone down since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris arrived in the White House. In Chicago, as of July 28th, there have been 29 fewer homicides than during the same period in 2023, an 8% drop, and 76 fewer shooting incidents, a 5% drop. But those decreases don't begin to erase the crime spike that began with the George Floyd race riots of 2020. The 7 major felonies tracked by the federal government were up 55% in 2023 compared with 2019. Through July 21st of this year, major felonies were up 53% from the same period in 2020. Mr. Johnson's explanations for Chicago's anarchy? Racism. Quote, Black death has been unfortunately accepted in this country for a very long time, end quote, he said after the July 4th shooting spree. Indifference to, quote, black life, end quote, Mr. Johnson maintains, led to, quote, generations of disinvestment, end quote, in black communities. The teens who rampage on Chicago's Magnificent Mile, beating and stomping on passersby and breaking car windows have been, quote, starved of opportunities in their own communities, end quote. After Memorial Day weekend 2023, when 11 people were killed and at least 30 more shot, Mr. Johnson reminded the city that, quote, poverty didn't go away over the weekend, end quote. Communities have been, quote, disinvested in and traumatized, end quote, he added, and, quote, you are seeing the manifestation of that trauma, end quote. It is hard to square that claim of poverty with the ubiquity of smartphones among juvenile looters and shooters. Social media is the police's friend, since youthful gangbangers often post videos of themselves showing off their guns and their stolen money. As for, quote, disinvestment, Chicago has been pouring billions into high-crime neighborhoods for decades. Illinois has thrown in hundreds of millions more over the past 5.5 years, dedicated to therapy, job training, substance abuse counseling, and other services to no avail. Mr. Johnson will find a kindred spirit in Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris, too, believes in systemic racism that, quote, seeps into every part of American life, end quote, to quote a 2020 address. In an April 2021 speech, she said that Floyd's death showed America the, quote, racial injustice, end quote, that keeps the country from, quote, fulfilling the promise of liberty and justice for all, end quote. Like Mr. Johnson, Ms. Harris also blames the lack of, quote, investment for crime. Quote, if you want safe communities, end quote, she said in the 2020 address, quote, you have to invest in the health of those communities, end quote. As California Attorney General in 2015, Ms. Harris implemented, quote, implicit bias, end quote, training for police officers, the first such statewide program in the country. She wants more police departments to come under federal consent decree for alleged civil rights violations. She rejects the idea that putting more cops on the street improves public safety. She opposes trying juvenile gang murderers as adults, and she opposes extended sentence for most convicted felons who commit a third felony. Ms. Harris can even take partial credit for Chicago's crime policies. In 2016, then Attorney General Harris co-chaired a transition team for Kim Foxx, the newly elected Cook County state's attorney. The team's report urged Ms. Foxx to, quote, address racial inequities in the justice system, in part by cutting back on the, quote, destabilizing over-incarceration, end quote, that plagues, quote, communities of color, end quote, and in part by further limiting the detention of juvenile criminals. Ms. Foxx immediately followed by California's lead and declared that her office would stop prosecuting felony shoplifting for all thefts under $1,000. Property crime skyrocketed. Avoiding disparate impact on black criminals became the guiding philosophy of Ms. Fox's tenure. Convention goers this month may be deprived of a full demonstration of Mr. Johnson's depolicing philosophy. Despite its depleted ranks, the Chicago Police Department will flood the convention zone with manpower by eliminating officers' day off and requiring back-to-back shifts. A disfavored technology has been granted a temporary reprieve. ShotSpotter uses audio sensors to alert the police to gunshots, the vast majority of which aren't called in to 911. On July 24th, for instance, ShotSpotter alone notified the police of a wheelchair-bound man who had been shot in the back. Mr. Johnson has refused to renew ShotSpotter's contract, claiming that technology leads to over-policing of black neighborhoods. The company was ready to pull out in February 2024, but Mr. Johnson insisted on a temporary extension of his contract through August. Apparently, racial justice isn't as urgent as electing Democrats. While conventioneers may be insulated from the Chicago way, if Kamala Harris becomes the next president, the country may not be so lucky. Ms. MacDonald is a fellow of the Manhattan Institute and author of The War on Cops, How the New Attack on Law and Order Makes Everyone Less Safe. In any event, I found that compelling, especially as we now enter the Democratic Convention and the election season. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel, which mainly consists of my reading my own essays and short stories. But this felt important to share with you. I also welcome you taking a look at any of my 34 books. Probably the most relevant to this is a book called A Dose of Reality, which I'm candidly more proud of than most because it is an antidote to groupthink. But all 34 are on Amazon. Just go there, search on my name, Marty Nemko, Nemko, and you will find more than you can stomach. In any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.